everybody. This is Bart Sharp, and you are on Becoming Quantum Conscious on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.7 and 103.5, broadcasting out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And we are also on the UPRN Talk Radio.com website, also on Roku, Facebook, YouTube, and other internet platforms. And I am not in my usual background. I am totally nomadic, as that's how summer works for me. I am in Glastonbury, England right now, and spending the day on the tour, communing with the goddess. And just in case you don't know what the tour is, this is a great big mound outside of Glastonbury, and it really does have a goddess energy with it. And you walk up this mountain, and each of your chakras gets activated as you walk up if you're paying attention. But, it's getting in touch with something very, very primal, an energy that goes straight up your body. And it is goddess central here. Of course, that means that lots of people are walking around in goddess clothes and doing the goddess thing, and that's always interesting. Not exactly what I'm doing. I got a t-shirt and blue jeans on. However, we're all in this together and having a great time. And please pardon the light on the right side. It doesn't get dark until 10 o'clock here. So just want to welcome our guest today, Dani Antman. Hey, Dani.
Hi, Bart. Good to
Hi.
see you again.
Yes, it's really great to see you. Dani is from Santa Barbara, California, and we've gotten to know each other once again through France. It's always interesting when you find something that you really love. This is personal advice time. Find something you really love. It attracts so many cool things, cool people, all kinds of stuff unexpectedly, but usually it's great stuff, which is very much in the case of Dani. I'm really glad to have you here.
Me too.
What if I just start with just talking about your bio? Dani Antman from Santa Barbara, California. As an energy healer and spiritual counselor, I have spent the past 30 years expanding and perfecting my knowledge of mind-body medicine. After decades of working with innumerable clients, one thing has become abundantly clear: spiritual awakening and healing are intertwined paths. Simply put, inner healing work enables the contracted and frozen places within us to open so that our essential spark can emerge. Only when we are free of these contractions, stuck places, emotional traumas, repressed emotions is what I think she's talking. When we are free of these contractions, then we can become the multidimensional awake beings we were born to be. So Dani works with Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, subtle body, a challenging 12-year Kundalini process, and near-death experience that completely changed her life. And in that, she has written a new book called Wire for God: Adventures of a Jewish Yogi.
It's a lot, huh?
Yes, and you can find her at DaniAntman.com, and that's DaniAntman. It's just like it sounds. Uh, and welcome to the show.
Hi. I just, before we go into anything about me, I just wanted to say how good it is to see you again. And our trip, which ended about a month and a half ago, was so impactful for me personally. And it got me off the meditation cushion and into nature and
Mm,
communing with stones and sacred caves and fields. And it reminded me that spiritual openings can happen anywhere, and nature is one of the biggest sources of accessing the spiritual. And
and
even having a Kundalini, arousal or awakening can happen just being in nature. And we'll talk about what that is in a minute. But especially also connecting with the divine feminine in sacred Southwest France and through the water, the rocks, the fields.
everything. And,
I'm really
you know,
grateful.
and one little thing that has just come to my attention by a friend of mine, Rob Wildwood, is that only 2% of the landmass in England, and this applies to France, are inhabited by people.
Mm,
And you would never think of that. You think of, oh, these are old countries, they're all filled up with people, and it's just not the case. They have packed all the people in, the people have integrated as a whole into the nature, the forest, the farmland, and so everything around them was growing.
mm.
And it creates something very different with them, even if some of the people are oblivious to it and they're staying inside watching television all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's out there, folks.
It
And
is
so,
out there and should be one of our prime resources in times of chaos. We'll leave it at
indeed.
that. We'll leave it at that.
And so we have a couple people popping in here. Sabri Smisk. Oh, I know I messed that up. And, oh my God, can you read that, Danny?
Allah is God. Emenet, Hokam, I'm not sure what that means. Emet in Hebrew is truth. I'm not sure what it is in that language, but maybe
Okay,
Sabri can tell
you,
us.
you done better than me. Thank you so much. And we just say hi to Phyllis Mim, one of our
Hi,
other
Phyllis.
Francophiles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My path is really unusual, and I want to talk about it a little bit in general terms because one could say that my soul path is related to the Jewish lineage, the Jewish mystical tradition, not so much the religion, but the mystical tradition that goes all the way back to the Essenes.
wow.
And yet, I managed to find later in my life a yogic teacher who has since passed on that was a real adept. I mean, the real deal, very unknown, not a guru, but somebody who had very sacred, secret knowledge about Kundalini science, and I'll define that in a minute. So I feel like I was guided my whole life
Wow.
to towards realization and awakening. And I didn't even know I wanted that until I was like 32 years old. So,
It takes some time sometimes. We just want to
yeah.
say hi to Charlotte Rocher,
Hi, Charlotte.
one of our other tour friends.
Yeah,
So
my
so
friends.
32 years old, that's an interesting age that says, well, something else is calling me.
It is a common age because it's right after the Saturn return astrologically. And I would say my whole life changed drastically at 32. And it started with um, a draw towards the healing arts. And again, I didn't know it would lead to a spiritual awakening. I was drawn to channeling and learning about chakras and energy fields. And it gradually opened up into a real yearning for spiritual knowledge. And I was led first to Kabbalah, which is, as I said, the Jewish mystical path, and then found this other teacher. So I think I'll just define those two terms because
Yeah,
people
yeah,
haven't really heard of them
and I know
before.
you really are following the tree of life in a lot
Yeah,
of
in
ways.
the Kabbalistic path. So Kabbalah literally means to receive. It's a word that means to receive the wisdom of the tradition. And there's no one book called Kabbalah. There's no one teaching called Kabbalah. There's actually an extraordinary variety of teachings. And a lot of the teachings center around the diagram of consciousness that people know as the tree of life, or the Etz Chaim in Hebrew.
Hmm.
And it's a map of consciousness. And people look at it as a flat 2D picture with 10 circles and 22 paths. But actually, it's probably 10-dimensional consciousness. The deeper you go into it, the more you realize that this is not a static diagram. And if you go deeper and deeper into esoteric practices related to the tree, um, you'll realize that they culminate the same place that other mystical paths culminate in, which
Hmm.
is an understanding of the oneness of all of creation. And even beyond that, that everything stems from nothing, basically. The Hebrew word from nothing is ayin, ayin, A-I-N in English. And the circles, which are called sphirot, the 10 qualities, divine qualities, are said to be from nothing. They come from nothing. They're made of nothing. And yet, they're qualities with which God created the world, time, space, material reality. And in reverse, if we use those qualities and unify ourselves with them, we will return towards God. It's like a ladder between heaven and earth.
That's beautiful. And, and I so agree with you that it does come into nothingness, a place of no energy, no density, no mass, and yet it's total power.
Right. It's
And
quantum consciousness. I know your talk is labeled becoming quantum consciousness. It
oh
exists in
yes,
Kabbalah, which is really old.
yeah, but we're just really trying to understand of how we get into nothingness and the awareness of nothingness, and then it starts to trick you, going, wait a minute, when you really go into those, there's nothing in existence there. And some people have that, places have that. Um, I really believe that the center of the sun has that. And so, how are you cultivating that in your life? You know, how has that
I
been working?
I want to talk about Kundalini as a way to answer that question. Um,
Sounds good.
so I spent years studying Kabbalah, and I work currently as a Kabbalistic healer. And it's a path of male and female unifications, you could say. The path of Kabbalah, you unify the left and the right, the male and the female. And as you do that energetically and consciously, there's a third thing that happens, which brings you to unitive consciousness. So I was very practiced at that. And nevertheless, I felt stuck spiritually at a particular time in my life. I knew I was not growing. And I
Mm,
would have glimpses of unitive consciousness, but I couldn't sustain them in my being. And it was frustrating. It was actually kind of depressing because I had done a lot of inner work and a lot of psychotherapy, couldn't sustain that access. And there was a time when I literally prayed for help. I mean, I asked out loud, I cried out for help in my inner practice. And lo and behold, in 2002, 2 weeks after I prayed in that way, an Indian man showed up in New York City where I was living. I was living in New Jersey, but I heard about him in New York City. And he was giving a talk about Kundalini science. And I went to the talk. And upon listening to how he described Kundalini, which was as the divine within every single person, actually, every single human being has this force and it comes into existence within us when the sperm meets the egg, really at conception. And most people wouldn't even know about it, but you could simply say it's the divine within, that it's
yes.
embedded in every single human being. And it's waiting to awaken as a coiled force in the first chakra. And people can be born with an already awakened or aroused Kundalini and not even know it. They could have no symptoms of it, but it might show up as a yearning for the divine or a deeply spiritual nature
and
or
and also
restlessness.
and also surprise them a bit because people sometimes have Kundalini awakenings and they have this spiritual knowing that comes up that um, really lets them know that there's something else much bigger inside of them that they not really realized.
Right. And it could show up spontaneously through trauma, through giving birth if you're a woman. It could show up in your dream state. It can show up in the form of a teacher. Um, Sometimes it gets a bad rap because there's very challenging energetic symptoms that show up with it when it's not in the right channels. And I had some of those. However, Kundalini is not energy, and there's a real misconception about that because of the challenging energetic symptoms that come up
Mm-hmm.
as it's progressing up through the chakra system. It's literally the divine force that it's a feminine force. It's called feminine because she wants to unite at the top of the head. Kundalini Shakti unites with Shiva at the top of the head in Indian Kundalini science, but it's not exactly energy. It's really the force of the divine feminine within you.
That's well explained, and it just uh, so many people think of the Kundalini stuff, and they just think of like a sexual awakening or an energetic awakening that feels good and it's between their hips. But as you'll
Right.
explain it, it's so much deeper in our hearts, but also our crown, and it's the whole body feeling
Mm-hmm.
this flow of life. We may call it energy, but it's really
The life
a
force.
frequency, a
Yeah,
higher frequency.
exactly. And the reason I could speak personally to why it's associated with sexual energy is that I had a previous Kundalini rising, according to what I found out from my teacher, from a previous life stuck at my throat chakra. And it was related to something from my Jewish past that wasn't able to complete.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher called it the left hand, the left path rising, which is associated in other cultures with Tantra. And it means that this male female union, usually experienced in sexual relationships, was used by um, adepts of certain traditions to generate gifts, psychic gifts, healing gifts, because it's a particular rising that goes straight up to the brain, and it opens brain centers which open, like psychic gifts, channeling gifts. um, and there is a way of using sex to have a spiritual opening, but it is so esoteric that there's like less than 0.1% of people on the planet that would actually know how to have that happen. And
Mm-hmm.
those teachings have gotten quite misused in current tantric paths, is in my humble opinion. But in order for the rising to culminate in enlightenment or self-realization, there's actually certain practices that I found out about and had to do to enable the energy to go down first and then re-enter the central column to be able to ascend to the sixth chakra above a point
Mm-hmm.
called Makara point
Mm-hmm.
and culminate in a real spiritual opening versus an opening that will give you a lot of highs, a lot of ecstatic experiences, a lot of light filled experiences, all of which I had. I had healing abilities, I had channeling abilities, but it was frustrating and a little bit like hitting a glass ceiling and falling down because the real opening was not possible until the rising was switched from left to central column.
Mm-hmm. And it just sounds like from what I don't really, I practice this type of stuff, but I don't practice it under this type of context. But in the spiritual journey, it's very similar for me, in that we may rise up energetically and be really expanding, working in one particular area. But a lot of times when you hit a ceiling in that particular area, like for example the throat, you have to it's basically because something repressed that's usually in the lower dantians, or the uh, in the gut second chakra area, a lot of times has finally risen. It's finally available to see, if you're willing to see it and start exploring what's ready to be revealed. Is
Right. I worked that way for a long time, and I still do because it's important work. I would call that the psychological, emotional work of clearing the chakras.
mm-hmm.
However, what happens when Kundalini stabilizes at the Ajna chakra through spiritual evolution through the Kundalini, very specific here, is that the chakras then go, the chakras are activated in a pattern stimulated by the brain centers, and they
mm-hmm.
purge the chakras in a different way
mm.
than the emotional, psychological way that you're talking about and that I've also used and been through. So there's a whole spiritual renovation and purge process that happens with a full Kundalini rising. But on the
Yep.
way up, all the stuff that you just named is also happening.
Yep.
And it can be confusing to people because it's hard to kind of know where you're at unless you have some really good guidance, I would say. And also what I learned that there's 6 different channels that Kundalini can rise through in the esoteric subtle body. 6.
mm-hmm.
And each of them has different gifts and different challenges.
Oh,
And when you look at people's awakening stories, which I'm pretty passionate about, I love to hear how people awaken, including through near-death experiences. They all have different characteristics because they're awakening through their religious soul's religious connections, but also
mm-hmm.
through different channels in the subtle body. And they give you different experiences, different light experiences, different visions, different challenges. So I
Yeah.
really spent 12 years also educating myself to know that nobody awakens the same way. We're all really, really unique.
Yeah.
And when the spiritual yearning is strong enough, you're guided from within by Kundalini Shakti to find your path, or it appears before you, or the teacher
Yes.
or the book appears before you.
Indeed. And there's so many ways to do this. And I just keep reflecting about this, about the limitations, is that if you're really are rising up there, almost like your personality has certain disorders. You know, you
Mm,
think certain ways, you want to play a certain role, you have maybe a same approach that you've had all your life towards women or towards men. And sometimes we just have to keep reviewing that and loosen that up so more rises.
I would say
Every
it's kind of, it dissolves, and if you're not letting it dissolve, you get a kick in the pants because all those beliefs start to dissolve. You're challenged by them, by people in your life. It's a big dissolution process of all those beliefs, all those behavioral conditioning patterns, and
and
it's
and
ongoing. It's
and
ongoing.
we always say, you know, I'll do anything to really have freedom, as we declare
Right.
in New
Anything
Age
but that,
spiritual
right?
groups, or and stuff, or whatever. You know, we've all said that, but it's also a kind of a message to your body that, well, I'm ready to go down that path. Because there's a lot of people that say, no, I don't want to change. Why would I have to? Why would I have to look at my, the way my mother treated me? I don't want to do that. And of course, they're probably less likely to have these type of experiences. Uh,
It's so funny, Bart. When I started healing training, that was exactly my words. Barbara Brennan, my teacher,
oh yeah,
looked at me once and said to me, "If you're going to open up, you're going to have to look at your mother issues." And I said, "No, not that." Those were my exact words.
yeah,
I
I've
think
heard
you were
that
just
before.
channeling. I think you were just channeling me 30 years ago.
Yeah, but I just think there's certain things with people, and that's their themes, and their scariest stuff, and that's exactly the type of stuff that you have to learn and explore and embrace on a psychological level, and then a lot of this stuff starts to loosen, and all of a sudden, when you go into the discipline of whatever you're doing, you get real progress.
I agree. Yep.
And so we're right at kind of at the middle point, and I got a great question to ask you, but I'll wait because I want to tell everybody that you are listening to Dani Antman at www.daniantman.com, and that'd be DaniAntman.com. And she has a new book called Wired for God: The Adventures of a Jewish Yogi. Uh, it's almost like there's a certain comedy with that title. I just love it. Uh, Also, my name is Bart Sharp, and this is Becoming Quantum Conscious at United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 107.7 and 103.5 out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and we are on FM and talk radio, www.eprntalkradio.com, and other internet platforms. So, you do a lot of the Kundalini energetic uh, Kabbalah. I know you say it differently, but I'm from Texas, so I can say Kabbalah. Um, and you combine all of this together to work with people.
I do.
And, I think it's really unique to see how people do things because I think, as any good transformative coach or practitioner, it's like an artist. We learn all of these things and then we break all the rules and create our own thing, or we break some of
Yep.
the rules.
Yep.
And so, how are you breaking the rules, huh?
I love that you said that because I would have said that pretty much the same way. You know, most of my work comes through presence and attunement. And I have a huge toolbox because I've studied trauma, I've studied, like you said, Kabbalah, I've studied the chakra system. But when somebody is with me, I'm really tuning into their system and their soul.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I would give an example because it's easier than talking
Yeah.
about it. I recently had a young man come to me with chronic cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic condition. And he was super skinny and really suffering the lung symptoms, which show up as mucus in the lungs, like constant mucus and can't breathe. And it was my first session with him. And we touched on so many areas of his life. One, that he was not on purpose. He was really not really doing his soul's purpose. He had the wrong diet. And he had been having some healing capacities, not accessing his spirituality. So the session focused on his whole being, including a recommendation for the change of diet, some herbs for his lungs, an energy session that really focused on his lungs and grief, because grief is often associated with his lungs. And I saw him again a month later, and he actually followed through with all the suggestions I gave him. He came in looking like a different person. He
Mm.
was heavier. He had gained weight because his diet changed. He was starting to pursue his passion for music. He had taken the herbs and could breathe better. So there was so much change. I was really astonished because
Yeah.
he followed through. There was no
Yeah.
resistance.
And also, there might have been a component in there with his lungs. that you addressed the lung issue, and therefore he didn't need all the gunky, gloppy stuff surrounding it to protect it. And is that a component in there?
Absolutely. And he also sobbed during the session, letting go of a lot of grief. And grief often gets stuck in the lungs. That's maybe a cliche, but it's also
Exactly.
true. It's really true.
It's very true. I have to agree. In different places in the lungs, which side of the lungs? Upper
Yeah,
lung is different than around the heart, and
right,
left side is definitely different than the right side.
right. And then, he wasn't fully accessing his spiritual capacities. And we talked about how he might pursue that and gave him some choices. I don't know what he's going to choose because he's a
Mm.
young guy and he's probably about 30. No, I think he's under 30. So he still has time to get some more education or pursue a path, right?
And when we say something like that to a young person, you know, I think when you're under 30, you just want results, damn it. And 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 something with spiritual stuff, a lot of people just don't understand, well, why am I doing spiritual things? And we're not talking religion per se, but
Mm-mm.
something else. And you know, what do you think somebody is really trying to get from that, or what should they be looking for when we start to say, let's start some spiritual practices?
Hmm. Sometimes people don't know what they're looking for. They have a nameless yearning.
Mm-hmm.
And, the old saying, trying to find it through sex, drugs and rock and roll, and it doesn't work. So they don't know what they're looking for. They're looking for some kind of connection and experience of union. And I would say personally that I was looking for God. And you asked me earlier, well, what about this no thing, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of interesting. The yearning for God has dissipated with the completion of Kundalini, and that's kind of a radical statement. What happens is I rest in no thingness at this point in my meditation. I go into the vast no thingness that you couldn't even name as any kind of quality, right? It has no quality. It has no thingness. It has no name.
But you
Um,
could call it a pure higher power vibration inside of you.
I could, and it's experienceable. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
where I go in meditation, and that's what I bring to my healings. Even though, like you said, I'm not directing it towards people, it's through existence, through presence, through beingness.
Yes, and it's almost like having a little diamond or something. It's so beautiful and shiny, and it just seems to be infatigable with uh, vibration and potency.
Potency,
And it's
potency.
yours. It's yours. It's exactly yours.
It's everyone's, right? Everything is
It
made
is
of it.
everyone's.
And it has intelligence. I don't need to tell it what to do. It's divine intelligence itself. And it's what created the whole manifest world, right? So if it knows how to create the world, it knows what we need and it knows where to go.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the manifestations of it is the angelic realm. And I have always known since I started the healing work that I have access to that realm. I think I was born that way.
Are
So
you
I
talking
also
about
work with the
just to
angels.
clear? Let's just to
Yeah.
clarify that you're talking about angels and archangels in that order of angels. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Okay, because there's an angelic realm that is a little bit different than that, and I just want to clarify that for the audience, uh, that we're talking your guardian angels, archangels, and that
Yeah.
order of that angel realms.
Yeah. I somehow have been gifted with that access, so they're always part of my healing work.
Yeah.
And they create a container for the other state to come through as energy, I guess you could say,
Mm.
or a safe space, protected
So,
space.
so is it a process also that you just keep adding on inside of your own inner team of consciousness? In other words, you have all of these tools, but they all accumulate to this state of nothingness.
Hmm.
But you've gotten a lot of other
It's Yeah, it's
things to
both
get
and.
there.
It's both and, right? It's a major purging, emptying out of all the conditioning, like you mentioned earlier, all those beliefs and conditioned habits and blocks.
Hmm.
And the tools exist because they're in me, like a paint, like I know how to paint, for instance, and that's never going to go away. But when I paint something, I'm not thinking about using my brush. I just paint.
You just paint.
So
It's
I
just a
just paint.
vibration. Yeah,
Right.
you've learned so many things. That's why it's always good to have a diary of your spiritual journey so
Hmm.
you can go back. And if you teach people how to do this, you can go, oh, this might be at the appropriate level for them. Uh,
Yeah.
that's been one of my experiences. But you just bring up this really important concept for people that it's an accumulation of different skill sets and vibrations, and there are beings that help you, there are teachers that help you, but ultimately you're getting to this autonomy
Hmm.
inside of yourself. Is that, am I
Yeah.
getting?
And the autonomy is the big self with a capital S. You know, your God self leading
Yeah.
you from within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did it feel like when you broke open into that and some of those levels? Because I know there's a lot of various levels,
Yeah.
but can you talk about a breakthrough experience?
Absolutely. Um, it's really a funny one. It's at the end of my book. I was at probably, I think it was my sixth or eighth retreat with my Indian teacher. And I was sitting outside having a cup of tea on a lovely morning at 7 in the morning. And I noticed a teeny little ant on the floor. And the ant was carrying a piece of a leaf that was probably 8 times its size in its mouth. It was walking along with this big piece of a leaf. And I thought, wow, that's a lot for a little ant to carry. And my name is Antman, which makes it even funnier, right? And all of a sudden, I heard a voice inside my head that said, you are like that little ant. And you've been carrying a big burden of all this crap, accumulated over lifetimes. And you know what? The voice said, you can drop that anytime. And when I
Hmm.
heard that I could drop it, something opened up in my consciousness, and I went into a vast, vast space like the cosmos. My
Hmm.
consciousness just kept expanding and expanding and expanding. And all thought went away, all notion of Dani or self went away. And I would say
Wow.
that was a breakthrough moment that to this day is still present, where like the world in me disappeared. And of course it
Wow.
comes back, but it was a benchmark for me.
Yeah, to go into that form of blankness, and as you said before, that place of beyond nothingness, it sounds like you dropped into that for a bit.
I did, and it stayed with me. And for a while, that whole like 6 months, I would have experiences of the physical world disappearing. Like I'd be at the grocery. I was doing a wedding once, and I had to dig my heels. I officiate weddings. I had to dig my heels into the ground to not disappear to finish the wedding. But
Mm.
that subsided. It was like my system going back and forth. And I would say my experience now is that both are present at once. I can drive my car and stay connected to that vastness that they're interpenetrating. I'm not crashing the car.
That's always helpful.
It's helpful when you're driving the car. I don't know
It
about you after we've been on the mountains like Bugarash, whether you
yeah,
can
yeah.
drive your car, but
I seem to have a knack for driving, uh, and my space is very different. This is just so wonderful that you're sharing it, and how some of the stories that you're getting there, because I think so many of us are popping up to that place, and so does it help you in your awareness of other people? I mean, when you hit a vibration like that, how does that help you serve others? Because
hmm.
service is an important part when you get to that place. You just don't sit around and do nothing. I mean, I guess some people do, but
I think
somebody like
some people
you,
do till it integrates. It has to integrate, and
yeah,
then
yeah, but you know what I mean. We go out and we want
yeah,
to do something to help humanity or other people, or
yeah.
maybe we become a better farmer or whatever we do in life.
You lose the sense of being the doer in your service. It arises and you do, and from that place of it's a natural arising desire to give, but not from a martyred place, or I have to do this to be a better person, or it
Mm,
doesn't come from that place. Service
yeah,
naturally arises.
yeah, yeah. That's a wonderful explanation. And
Yeah.
when you work with people, does it really help you see them more, uh, have more awareness to see their limitations, their wholeness, all of these things, and maybe you don't even know why, how, or why you had that perception, but voila, you see something in them that isn't obvious.
All the time. And mostly I see through the eyes of the soul and through the heart, through love.
Yeah.
And even with people that are irritating or people that I get angry with, I've become very practiced at looking at myself and what it's triggering inside of me first.
Mm,
And we still get triggered.
yeah.
And even at advanced stages of spiritual awakening, whatever that means, that word advanced, there's these um, deep conditioned aspects of us that still come up, and they come up in relationship to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all have our trigger points. I have my issues that of what I do, and it's there. But I think what you're saying is what so many of us want to become is in that space of blankness. You see things differently. Your creativity is more expanded, and you seem to pull in things easier or attract things easier. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
talks about the law of attraction and power of positive thinking, that you're directing, and almost it's like focus, 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 on your what you want to create. Whereas this is more being, being, being who you are.
I agree. Yeah. Can I
And,
mention one thing before we leave each other?
yeah, yeah,
Because,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I want to ask you another question. I'm going to percolate this. If there's a couple of things you suggest for people to do to start achieving this state of being, what would they be? Let's set that question on the table, and your turn now to just mention what you're going to mention.
I just wanted to briefly mention the divine feminine in the Jewish tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Because after I had such an amazing experience with Shakti operating through Kundalini in my body, I went back to try to figure out how is that working in Kabbalah. And Shekhinah, or Shekinah, as people say, it's really Shekhinah in Hebrew,
Okay.
is the Hebrew word for the divine feminine. And it means dwelling, that she who dwells within. Isn't that nice? It's she who dwells within creation and she who walks with us in our physical lives as
Mm-hmm.
human beings. And what's funny is, until the mid, I don't know, 1200s, 1300s, there wasn't really a divine feminine talked about in that way in the Kabbalah. It took Kabbalah to talk about the divine feminine. It's
That's
not mentioned
interesting.
that way in the Torah. And there's a whole resurgence of now female rabbis in the Jewish path and books written by female rabbis. There's a resurgence of the divine feminine presence in the Jewish tradition in the past 30 years.
Hmm.
And I think that's equally as important as the resurgence of Mary Magdalene right now. It's
Indeed.
really important for the earth to,
Indeed, and Mary Magdalene is one of many of these goddess figures or representing of that. But basically, you say Shekinah, and we in Texas say Shekinah. Uh,
right, not quite
uh,
the right pronunciation, but
I
nice.
know, but I'm from Texas. I can get away from it. So,
Yeah,
but it is finding that essence of light that the feminine initiates.
right.
So,
The
can you
feminine initiates. That's very important.
yeah, yeah. And so, can you give some pointers and ideas of how to get
Yeah,
there?
yeah. I would say every person is going to find that their own way. My way was through prayer. I was desperately wanting help, and I prayed. That's that sentence: knock 3 times, and you will receive an answer. So
Mm,
for me, it was through prayer. But I know for certain people, it's through dance, it's through nature, it's through finding a meditation teacher, through singing, um, through human relationship, for sure. But to keep um, to keep that yearning going until you find you have found what you're searching for. So sometimes we're searching for a boyfriend, but it leads to a yearning for spirituality, which leads for a yearning for God. You don't know at the beginning.
yeah, I think that yearning to keep yearning and keep looking, because no path is the same.
Yeah. You just said something before really profound. There's a statement from the Zohar, which is a Jewish mystical text, that says every arousal from above requires an arousal from below. And we can take that as meaning an action or a request from below, or we could take that as meaning Kundalini, arousing from below. That she who wants to ascend will bring down an arousal from above, like God hears. Your
Hmm.
your prayers are answered.
Indeed. I mean, I was sitting at the tour this very uh, afternoon, uh, and this is like this big. It's partially natural, but also it's partially man-made. But it has a goddess energy at the bottom that goes up to the top. However, if you just sit on something like that or sit on the earth and allow this from below, that would be the goddess, it could be Gaia, it could be Venus, it could be summoning of whoever that,
Jesus, Mary.
yeah, exactly, any of these, but you're just bringing it in and starting to cultivate an energy in your second chakra, first chakra, and learning what that feels like.
That was really important for me on our trip that you taught us. And I've been using that. I would say that some people are top down and others bottom up. Like I always had my crown open, and it's taken me a lot of work to get grounded in this
Mm-hmm.
plane.
Mm-hmm.
Other people are real rock and stone people, and they come in grounded, and it takes them work to open up their crown.
Yeah,
So
but
for
you,
me, the
but
rocks were
also,
really important. Yeah.
yeah, but if you're going way up, and you're up in the crown, usually you have the sensitivity to feel vibrations, and you just have to cultivate what those vibrations would feel like if you brought them down into your first chakra. you know.
Right, but that's hard for people who are not connected to their bodies. And just to say a quick word about trauma, if you've had a lot of trauma, it's easier to go up than go in your body. So I
So,
really did a lot of studies in how to work with trauma. I'm a
so just
certified somatic
yeah.
experiencing
So
practitioner.
just throw in 1 minute how you deal with trauma. How do you help people deal with trauma?
You help people find ways to regulate their nervous system in teeny, teeny bits so that those teeny bits build up to more resilience and capacity to not go into fight, flight, or freeze immediately when you're stimulated by fear, something dangerous.
Hmm.
So you work on safety first in your nerve, and
Wow.
you as a nervous system capacity.
Good 1 minute answer. It
Yeah.
is about feeling the body and, as you say, the nervous system and learning what it feels like instead of reacting into your program behavior, which might be freaking out, nervous anxiety, smoke a cigarette, eat a chocolate bar, you know, and circulate that away,
Or
which,
completely leaving your body and disassociating.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
But it makes you demand. I mean, I think it's a karmic choice. It's like some people just will demand and, as you say, yearn to improve, you know. So we're coming down to the end of the show. Why don't you give it a minute or so about what are you doing these days and projects and various things that you're
well, mainly
putting
I
out
work
there?
one on one with people. I work on Zoom. I work internationally. And I've had a long term group, one group, and I'm probably going to open it up to another group in September that focuses on support for spiritual awakening. And since I wrote the book, I've gotten tons of calls about people who are having challenging awakening processes, and I work with them both energetically and on an informational and guide mentoring basis for people in challenging awakening processes. And I live in gorgeous Santa Barbara. So, I mean, really, it's such a beautiful place here. So, I find that supports my work because I can go to the beach, every day. We have mountains. We're between the mountains and the ocean here, and it's really glorious. So I try to do some of the practices you taught us by being outside and sitting on rocks and hiking and being in the water,
Mm.
all of the above.
Yeah, it's always that's a wonderful place because Santa Barbara. I've been there. It's very powerful because
Yeah.
of the San Andreas ley line, and you know, California is totally energized
Yep.
in its own unique way, just like France is, and just like Glastonbury, as I'm here today.
What's
uh,
funny is I bought a condo 7 years ago, and I didn't find out till after I bought it that the whole complex here was created by by TMers, Transcendental Meditation teachers. It was
Whoa,
built for the teachers, and it was built on Vastu principles, which are really ley line principles, energetic principles. So the
wow,
condo I finally found was built on energetic ley lines, I think.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Good place to live. Uh, Neat. So one last thing. Uh, Words of wisdom that you wish to depart, parting wisdom you want to give to everybody. And while you're thinking about that, I want to tell everybody that you've been listening to Becoming Quantum Conscious. My name is Bart Sharp, and this is United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 107.7 and 103.5 FM out of New Orleans, Louisiana. This is Dani Antman, and you can find her at www.daniantman.com, DANIANTMAN. And next week we have Richard Stanley, and
Oh,
we
good.
are going to be talking about the Cathar life. the inspiration stories. Richard lives in France, and of course, he comes to my table at a restaurant where Dani and other women are having lunch and asks me, Bart, do you think they want to hear anything about Cathars? And I go, from you, Richard? Surely. And because Richard is an expert in the history of Cathar, and he proceeded to give us like the entire history within 1 hour, uh, while he had a coffee, smoked 3 cigarettes, rolled 3 cigarettes, and never looked at his cigarettes while he rolled it, while he talked at this continual pace, telling this fascinating story. I don't think I'll ever forget that. I think it's
Me
one of my
neither. He's great. Can't
favorite
wait to
Richard
see that.
Stanley stories because he's a phenomenal man. So he'll be on next week. Uh, and we'll be at Ridley Bond at his house having pizza before the show. Uh, so I'm looking forward to a really interesting evening from the start to the finish. So close us with a parting wisdom. You got about a
Yeah,
minute.
I would say that for all of you out there in challenging circumstances, you are never alone. And there's always a different way to work through your circumstances. And when you ask for help, when you pray for help, that help will arrive in ways you can't even expect. But it's the actual asking, that's the arousal from below, that will allow the help to come in ways that you can't even imagine. So always ask for help when you need it.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you for being on the show, Dani.
Total pleasure, and I hope to see you again. And I'm going to watch next week too. That'll be a blast.
It will. All right, everybody. We'll see y'all next week and have a great
Bye.
week, everybody. Thank you, Dani.